Why the f would you believe that he was going to do something for Palestinians? Give me a single thing that he has ever said or done that would indicate he would have shown up and done something for Palestinians. Where did that come from?
At the end of the day, as Arab Americans or Muslims, we really didn't have much of a choice.
Let's hear from voters who didn't vote for Harris because of Gaza. CNN spoke with such voters. Talked about it a little bit on the pod, and Pondering referred to polling that he saw that suggested that of the Democrats that voted for Biden in 2020 but didn't vote for Kamala in 2024, he said he saw polling to suggest that for 25% of them, for a quarter of those voters who sat out 2024, Gaza was the most important issue. That blew my mind. I found that shocking that it was that much. CNN talked to some of those voters, and yeah, we'll see what they have to say.
At the top of the program, we laid out the administration's rewriting of what the president said last night about taking over Gaza and remaking it as a Riviera of the Middle East, his words. Regardless of what the people around him say he said it all on camera, and millions of people saw it, including Arab Americans, many of whom voted for him. More from CNN's Jason Carroll now in Dearborn, Michigan.
Days before the last presidential election, Donald Trump was the invited guest at the Great Commoner restaurant in Dearborn, Michigan. Albert Abbas says he extended that invitation, a decision he is now reflecting on, given all that has happened in the last 24 hours.
Many in the community are at a loss for words. Last night was a very rough night for most of us.
Abbas is Arab American and one of a number of Democrats who voted for Trump. Abbas says he hoped Trump would do more than President Joe Biden did to help Palestinians suffering in Gaza.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip.
But after Trump said Palestinians should leave Gaza so it can be redeveloped, Abbas says not only does he feel betrayed, he's hearing from a number of people angered over his...
Okay, so I want to lay something out, right? Because like I don't know if you guys follow, like I follow quite a bit of people on Twitter. And again, we talked about this on the pod last night, but there's more than a few accounts that I've had to unfollow because I'm seeing some people on my feed that are legitimately celebrating what Trump announced with respect to Gaza. People are full-throatedly saying, I'm glad this is happening to you. To people that sat out the election or voiced opposition to Kamala from the left flank because of Gaza. I've seen people quote retweeting them and saying like, good, I'm glad this is happening to you. That is insane. If Donald Trump follows through on this, which I do think he's serious about this, it would be like the Nakba times 1,000. Full on displacing 1.8 million people is the Nakba means a catastrophe, I believe, in the native language there. This would be a catastrophe that would be 1,000 times worse. And so to take something like that and then be petty about it in that way, like, oh, I'm glad this is happening, you deserve it, is insane. Because the Palestinians living in Gaza have nothing to do with our politics. I don't know. I don't claim to have special insight into the mind of Gazans, but I suspect if you polled them now, 95% of them would say like, we really wish that Kamala would have won. I would bet so much money that that's the case. Is there any reporting on the reaction from Palestinians in Gaza? Is anybody reporting on that right now? Because that's what I really want to know is like, how do they feel about Trump's announcement? But I'm digressing a little bit. I think it is fully unhinged to wish this kind of catastrophe on your political opposition because you think they did something stupid in November. That's way too far. However, I have a really hard time sympathizing with this person. I'm not glad that it's happening, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for this guy. If you were a part of some Arab group that did advocacy for Donald Trump and, you know, mounted an oppositional group against Kamala Harris because you thought that Trump was going to be better for Palestinians in Gaza, that is so outside of my ability to understand. How did you come to that conclusion? How the f did you come to that like calculus? Why the f would you believe that he was going to do something for Palestinians? What give me a single thing that he has ever said or done that would indicate that he would have shown up and done something for Palestinians. Where did that come from? There was a group in Dearborn, Michigan. That's a city in Michigan that went majority for Trump this time around. I don't remember what the margins were, but I want to say that Trump got 60, 70%, maybe 80 of the vote in Dearborn, which is a majority Muslim population in Michigan. And there was a group in Dearborn called Arabs for Trump. They were a group that was frustrated, angry with the Biden administration for their support for Israel, and they passed that down to Kamala. He inherited Biden's baggage with respect to Israel. And so they formed a group and, mounted advocacy against her, and Trump wins. And then this gets announced, and this group, Arabs for Trump in Dearborn, they changed their name to Arabs for Peace. And now I guess they're all pissed off. And they were blindsided by this somehow. Somehow this surprised them. I don't have a lot of sympathy for those people, Definitely have sympathy for Palestinians. That has always been the case, and I will always be the case. But not, how do you expect me to feel sympathy for someone in that? There's just no way. It's beyond my capability.
Past support of Trump.
People were really, really frustrated. And I don't think there's anyone to blame. At the end of the day, as Arab Americans or Muslims, we really didn't have much of a choice.
Dearborn, a Detroit.
I think this is a really good example of human beings. Human beings are really flawed. We're very flawed. Our decision-making processes can be tainted by our emotional state. We're not like Spock from Star Trek, where we operate, 99.99% of the time just on pure reason, logic, deductive reasoning. And I believe these people they felt strong emotions, and you can't, I sympathize with them when it comes to that. The fact that they were feeling strong emotions during the election with this conflict that was ongoing throughout the entire election season, basically. I sympathize with them for having like a strong emotional reaction to what was happening, especially if they have like a familial connection to the region, if they have actual family in the region, people that have been displaced or killed. I do sympathize with that, but I think it's unfortunate that these people, I think, made decisions, and you can't entirely blame them. Michigan wasn't the only issue for Kamala, but they made decisions based on their emotional reactions. And I think this is a really good example of when that can go wrong. How sometimes it's really important to consciously try to divorce yourself from emotions before making any kind of like decisions. Sometimes in life, you got to do that. Sometimes in life, you got to like pause, focus on your breaths, try to see past your own emotional state and come to a conclusion that's more based on something rational, because every indication that we had during the election was that Trump was he told us what he was gonna do. He told us exactly. He didn't say that we were gonna like annex Gaza, but he said like, I'm gonna get out of Netanyahu's way. That's what he said. On the campaign trail, he said over and over and over again, I'm just gonna get out of the way. I'm not gonna tell them what to do. I'm not gonna tell them what not to do. I'm going to give them what they need to end this war, and they need to just finish the job. So if you're an Arab group in Michigan, I can totally understand feeling like, well, if I vote for Kamala, what is that actually even going to accomplish? I totally understand having that reaction. Although I do think that my sense is that she would have been much tougher on Netanyahu. I don't think she would have. I think she felt a personal allegiance to Biden and didn't want to shit talk him during the campaign trail, which I think was a mistake. That was a mistake. Not putting enough distance between her and him. When it was so obvious that she was inheriting like all of his baggage, she should have done more to, she could have pulled him aside and said, listen, I'm going to have to talk shit about you a little bit in the media, but this is why. Look at this poll here. Look at this poll here. Look at these vulnerabilities over here. I have to do this. And I want you to know, like you're family to me and I'm always going to love you and blah, blah, blah. But this is a political calculation. I have to do this. And I think she should have, and she could have done that. I do think she would have been tougher on Netanyahu. I do think she would have laid out more like conditions for aid. Every indication is that Joe Biden is an old school Zionist, like a old school. Do you guys understand that nobody supports Israel like boomers? Nobody supports Israel like boomers. It's like a part of their culture. It's like a firmly embedded part of their culture. The establishment of the state of Israel represented a huge, like it was such a big deal, the older generations when it happened. And before, like obviously this was before the subsequent decades of constant violence and war. But at the time when it was established, I mean, like Martin Luther King, for example, was a huge Israel supporter. He saw, he saw Israel as being the most important democracy in the world, is what he said, and said that there was a lot of overlaps between like the plight of Jewish people and like the civil rights struggle in the United States. Like boomers, Israel is just a really big deal to boomers, and I think Biden was just, quite frankly, he was just completely played by Netanyahu. Netanyahu, I think, knew that about Biden and took advantage of that over and over and over and over again. And what did he get for it? A few days ago, there's a press conference and somebody asks Netanyahu if Trump was instrumental in like orchestrating the ceasefire deal, which doesn't even appear to be. The ceasefire, I guess, is just off. I don't think there's any more pretenses that the ceasefire in like, stage 2 and stage 3, like who actually thinks that's going to happen at this point?
Detroit suburb is home to the largest Arab American population in the United States. Community which helped Trump carry the critical swing state. He won 42% of the vote in Dearborn versus Vice President Harris with 36%.
Okay, so I was wrong. He didn't get a majority. He got a plurality.
And Jill Stein with 18. In 2020, Biden handily carried the city with 69%. Faye Nimmer voted for Trump in 2024 out of frustration over the previous administration's support of Israel. Now, she is troubled by the president's proposal to move Palestinians out of Gaza.
I mean, it's very concerning and it's infuriating.
Personal feelings, you're infuriated, but standing by your decision for now to have voted for Trump.
Correct.
This is okay. There's a concept in poker called pot committed, and it's a fallacy. It's a gambler's fallacy. When you're playing poker, there are 4 rounds of betting, pre-flop, flop, turn, river. And a lot of people will make very dubious calls at each step of the way. And then you get to the river, the final round of betting, and somebody that you're up against bets, let's say half the pot or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The fallacy here is that the person who makes a dubious call, they call with like mid pair or low pair or some shitty hand, they feel pot committed at that point. Well, I've already invested so much money. It's stupid of me not to invest a little bit more at the end. When odds are that they don't have the winning hand. Or sunk cost fallacy is a similar kind of concept. And I think this is what we're seeing right now. These people spent so much time shitting on Kamala. And if they acknowledge in this moment that what Trump is doing is like so much worse than what would be happening on Kamala's watch, then they would have to acknowledge that they spent months doing something really stupid. And the human ego is a powerful thing, and it will do what it has to do to protect you from that kind of like shame or guilt. And so I think that's what we're saying. The idea that she's still sticking with Trump after this is insane.
And what would move?
And it's infuriating.
Personal feelings, you're infuriated, but standing by your decision for now to have voted for Trump.
Correct.
And what would move that needle for you to say, you know what, I made a mistake?
Palestine is the red line for this community.
Nimmer says she suspects Trump.
That red line is, I'm laughing. I shouldn't be laughing, but like that red line is nuked. What red line? Your red line is already gone, lady. It's gone. Your red line is way back there. Back there.
Is bluffing and is using his proposal as some sort of negotiating tactic. That's the same sentiment shared by Amar Zar.
First, this is clearly not going to happen, right?
And real estate broker Ali Alfarajala.
A lot of people are calling me and texting me saying, hey, how did your vote work out? How is that third party vote?
Both were so-called protest voters. Neither supported Trump or Harris. Are there any sort of second thoughts now about having supported a third party candidate?
Absolutely not. And I'll still do it again and again and again.
I didn't vote for Trump. So a protest vote? I don't know. I would say it was a targeted vote of conscience.
Amar Zar.
Good, thank you.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Zahir. I'm an activist, a lawyer, comedian, and a professor.
Of course, everybody knows you here. Why are you here today?
Well, I'm here to make sure that the community comes out for Jill Stein so that we can show our power in this election and to show all the parties that genocide is a red line and that we are not going to vote for anyone who is supporting the massacres of our people.
Do you think she can make a difference?
I think that we have a historic opportunity this year to show that our community can turn Michigan one way. And we have to show, especially the Democratic Party, that this recipe that they're using doesn't work, it won't work this year, and it won't work in the future.
Sure showed us. Boy, you sure showed us, didn't you? I don't know about you guys, but I learned my lesson.
To say that The children of Gaza have to mean something. Their death has to mean something.
And while Arab Americans here were
In fact, what it means now is that, 1.8 million Palestinians are at risk of being ethnically cleansed from Gaza. That's what it means.
divided in the past, going forward, one point is uniting them: opposition to Trump's proposal to move Palestinians out of Gaza.
Speaking of Jill Stein,
you guys, I'm gonna file a missing persons report because I'm a little concerned. Like, I cannot find Jill Stein anywhere. Like, she vanished. I mean, her last TikTok was well over a month ago, and with as vocal as she was during the whole presidential campaign season, I would expect her to be out here, especially with what Donald Trump said yesterday, that the United States is basically going to occupy the Gaza Strip and displace the 1.2 million.
don't worry, she'll be back. Every 4 years, she comes back like, what's like a mythical story of someone, like the Green Knight? She'll be back like the Green Knight in 4 years.
Gaza.
The community will be unified. I will tell you this. Palestinian people would rather die and live in a demolition site than to be ethnically cleansed and being sent out of Gaza to Egypt or Jordan.
So again, Anderson, after spending some time here in the Arab American community, you really get a sense that they feel like they've been let down by both Republicans and Democrats. Certainly there's a great deal of frustration after hearing what Trump is proposing, but there's also a feeling that had Harris been elected, had it been a Harris administration, the feeling here is that Palestinians would still be suffering. Anderson?
Just Carol, thanks very much. And Dearborn with me now. Put some numbers to the stories. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enton. Generally speaking, has there been much an appetite in the U.S. for to get involved in rebuilding Gaza?
No.
No, there has not been. Look, we have no new polling since last night, right? Polling works fast. It doesn't work that fast. But in the polling that we had prior, or that was taken towards the middle end of last year, what we saw was the overwhelming majority of Americans opposed the idea that the United States should take a lead role in reconstructing Gaza. You can see it right there, 57% opposed, just 37% support. And what I should note is the support was lowest among Trump's own base of Republicans. So the idea that this is going to sell among the American people at large or the Republican base, simply put, he definitely wasn't looking at the polls before he went out there and made a statement that was heard around the world because of how crazy it sounded to most people.
How did Palestinians view President Trump during his first administration?
How do better? Yeah, so we talk about Americans, right? But at the end of the day, the Gaza Strip is filled with Palestinians, right? So the question is, how did Palestinians feel about Donald Trump during his first term? And the bottom line is they absolutely disapproved of his leadership. I mean, you rarely see numbers like this. Look at this. 78% during his first term disapproved of his leadership. Just 10% approved of it. And I even drilled down a little bit more because I love going into those crosstabs. And what I found was approval, or at least disapproval among Gazans was even higher. The disapproval among Gazans was even higher than it was among Palestinians overall. So simply put, this would not be a popular plan either in America or in the Palestinian territories.
Because Donald Trump completely Palestinians during his first term, completely them. He was the first president since the dawn of Israel. He was the first president to break from established U.S. foreign policy, which, our position was a two-state solution across every president. The position was we should do a two-state solution and explore a peace deal. And Donald Trump came in there and said, you know what? We don't even need to worry about the Palestinians. We're not even going to touch that question. The Palestinians, we are going to move ahead with the Abraham Accords. We are going to move ahead with our own plan to have normalized relations between Israel and the neighboring Arab states. And we are going to do it without even touching the question of Palestinian statehood. And this is what, he also moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which was highly provocative. It ended up leading to the Great March of Return, which ended in violence. And you could very credibly argue that you can draw a straight line from Trump's decision to move that embassy to October 7th. You can draw a straight line from these two things. So yeah, it's obvious why Palestinians, when they're polled, overwhelmingly disapproved of what Trump did.
We are finally putting America first. Our policy of never-ending war, regime change, and nation building is being replaced by the clear-eyed pursuit of American interests. We do not seek nation building. We're going to end the era of nation building, a disastrous concept, a disastrous era. Why are we nation building over there? We want a nation build over here.
When President Donald Trump first entered politics nearly a decade ago, he did so with promises of putting an end to nation building and removing the U.S. from foreign entanglements in the Middle East. But now he's, of course, said that he has a new plan to redevelop the Gaza Strip. Or as his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, put it, quote, make Gaza beautiful again. Rubio clarifying some of the details of the president's proposal yesterday.
The only thing President Trump has done very generously, in my view, is offer the United States willingness to step in, clear the debris, clean the place up.
As Israel's defense minister readies its military for the, quote, voluntary departure, end quote, of Palestinians from Gaza, one thing that's clear, President Trump and his plan have the full support of his Israeli counterpart, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is the first good idea that I've heard. It's a remarkable idea, and I think it should be really pursued, examined, pursued, and done, because I think it will create a different future for everyone. He's the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House.
All right, joining us now, former Chief of Staff to Benjamin Netanyahu, George Birnbaum. Sir, good morning. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Good morning, Casey.
I'd like to start with the meeting itself, and especially the look on the Prime Minister's face there, as well as some reporting that he was as surprised by this as almost anyone. The New York Times wrote this, quote, it wasn't only the Americans who were scrambling after the press conference. The announcement came just as much of a surprise to Mr. Trump's Israeli visitors. Soon before they walked out for their joint news conference on
It really came out of nowhere, this announcement.
Tuesday, Mr. Trump surprised Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel by telling him he planned to announce the Gaza ownership idea, according to two people briefed on their interactions. You've obviously worked closely with Netanyahu. What did you read into his reaction, and how surprised was he?
Netanyahu is probably elated because for him, this like solves the Gaza problem, and he doesn't have to take any of the heat for it. It's just, oh, it's America's going to do this. Okay, great. You know, I'm sure he was thrilled by this idea.
Well, I would say this: Netanyahu is a very astute follower of political chess. And we saw a few announcements prior to the prime minister's arrival that were a little strange. One was the announcement that the King of Jordan would be coming to visit the White House.
You're saying it's all a distraction. I'm not so sure on this one. I'm not so sure. The reporting suggests that Trump got the idea from Jared Kushner, and I think he is dead serious about this. If there's enough backlash and he sees like disastrous polling among Republican voters, maybe he backs off. But I think at the time that he announced it, he was 1,000% serious.
In a couple of weeks. And while, with all respect to the King of Jordan, I could think of 24 world leaders that the president would invite to the White House prior to the King of Jordan. We also saw the announcement of a very unique arms sale to Egypt just a day prior to the prime minister arriving. Of course, Egypt and Jordan being two key players in President Trump's plan. So the prime minister may have been surprised that the announcement came so quickly, but I believe that he probably was reading the tea leaves a little bit, in that President Trump did have something in mind by having these two very strange events occur so early into his presidency regarding the invitation of the King of Jordan as well as the arms sale to Egypt.